He didn't mean to save her that day. She was just a widow, with nowhere left to go, and he was just a man who knew what it meant to lose everything. But when their paths crossed in the cold, something neither of them expected began to take root. Something that would heal them all. Before we begin this unforgettable journey of second chances, quiet courage, and a love that lit up the darkest porch, make sure to subscribe for more stories that remind us kindness still changes lives. Now let me tell you what really happened when a single dad sheltered a widow and her twin girls shunned by their family, never knowing they'd heal his heart. The wind howled through Frost Hollow like an old widow mourning at the edge of the world. Snow swirled in thick sheets, wrapping the quiet bus depot in a curtain of white muffling sound movement, almost breath itself. It was the kind of cold that made metal bite and words freeze in your throat. And yet there, beneath the flickering lamp above bench 3, stood a woman in black. Marigold Vance pulled her coat tighter around her body, though it was barely more than a funeral wrap. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the weight of a decision she hadn't made yet, now had to live through. On one side of her stood her daughter, Tessa, small and pale, clutching a tattered bunny. On the other, Twyla, the bolder of the two, trying hard not to cry, but failing quietly. Both wore second-hand boots too big and grief too heavy. Behind them, Harlan Vance stood with his hat in hand. The old man, gaunt and weathered, stared at the snowy pavement like it might crack open and swallow him whole. Noreen, his wife, hovered just behind her arms, wrapped around her own grief. She didn't say a word. She had said all she could in the kitchen that morning, words like, impossible, no way forward, and we wish we had a choice. I'm sorry, Marigold Harlan finally muttered, his voice hoarse. We ain't got the means. Arthur was our rock. Since he's gone, we've barely kept the lights on. This ain't what we want. Marigold bit the inside of her cheek hard. I know, she whispered, but you're still sending us away. Noreen stepped forward, eyes rimmed red. She pulled her old wool scarf from around her neck and wrapped it around Marigold's shoulders. Take this. It's not much, but I made it when Arthur was born. Thought it should stay with you. Twyla looked up at her grandmother, confusion in her eyes. Why can't we just live with you? Noreen knelt, her body creaking like the chapel pews, and brushed a gloved hand across Twyla's cheek. Because love isn't always enough to keep the furnace running, baby. That was when the bus pulled into the depot, a slow grind of wheels on salted pavement. The lights cut through the flurries like twin blades. Marigold turned to the girls. Let's go, sweethearts. They didn't move. Then came the coughing. Tessa wheezed a rattling sound from deep in her chest. Marigold dropped to her knees, wrapping both arms around her. She's burning up, she gasped. Harlan reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. Here, get some medicine when you get wherever you're going. Marigold looked at the bill, then at the girls, and then toward the endless stretch of highway. Nowhere felt like an option anymore. Then came a voice. Low, steady, and deeply human. Ma'am, you all right? Marigold turned. A tall man stood beside a battered gray pickup boots thick with slush. He wore a heavy canvas coat and a beanie tugged low. His name, stitched in faded thread over his chest pocket, read, Boaz. She hesitated. We're just waiting on the bus. Boaz looked at the girls, the scarf, the snow gathering on their hair. He stepped forward, slow and sure. That girl's got a fever, he said gently. There's no heat on that bus worth trusting. And he turned to Harlan and Noreen. You sure about this? Noreen looked away. We've got no choice, Harlan murmured. We're not bad people. I didn't say you were. Boaz crouched beside Tessa, and put a hand gently on her back. "My name's Boaz Whitlow. I live 15 minutes from here. I've got heat soup, dry clothes, one empty room. It ain't much, but it's warm." Marigold stared at him. "Why would you do that?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a folded photograph from his wallet, faded and worn. It was of a little girl with a gap-toothed smile standing beside a woman who looked far too tired for her age. "That's my wife. Lost her 4 winters ago. This is my daughter, Juniper. She doesn't speak much, but she knows how to listen." Marigold's throat tightened. And I know what it's like to be left in the cold." The bus hissed as its doors opened. Boaz stood and offered his coat. "You could freeze out there, or you could come with me, just until you find your footing." She looked at Harlan, whose eyes had welled. He gave the slightest nod. "Go," he whispered. "Give them what we can't." Marigold didn't answer. She simply lifted Tessa into her arms, took Twyla's hand, and followed Boaz to the truck. As the tail lights of the pickup disappeared into the snowy night, Noreen reached for Harlan's hand and held it tight. I think she whispered we just witnessed a miracle. The truck's old heater groaned like an elderly man standing up too fast, doing what it could against the Vermont cold. Inside, Marigold held Tessa close as the little girl's head rested against her chest, fever-warm and damp. Twyla curled beside them, quiet but watchful. The cab smelled faintly of pine-scented air freshener engine grease and something deeper, perhaps solitude. Boaz didn't speak much as he drove his hand steady on the wheel. The headlights cut through the swirling snow in long beams, lighting up a winding, tree-lined road that looked like it belonged to another time. Marigold wasn't sure if she should be scared, a stranger in the middle of nowhere. But his silence wasn't cold, it was kind. It was the kind of silence that made room for someone else's pain. When they pulled up, the cabin looked like something from a storybook. Small, weathered its roof, thick with snow. A woodpile stood to the side, neat and proud. Smoke curled from the chimney. A soft yellow porch light glowed above the steps. Boaz parked, then turned to her, with a voice as even as the snow falling outside. "Let me go in first. I'll get the stove up and the lights on. You wait here just a minute." Marigold nodded. Her fingers brushed over Tessa's damp forehead. Twyla leaned into her side. Boaz moved quickly, unlocking the door and disappearing inside. Within seconds, light spilled from the windows, flickering and warm. Then he was back, opening the truck door with gentle hands. "Come on, it's warm now." She stepped into the cabin and blinked. It was nothing fancy, just a single open room with a tiny kitchen off to the side, a sofa, a fireplace, and a hallway that led to 2 bedrooms. But it was clean, and most importantly, it was safe. Boaz brought out extra blankets. "You can take the bedroom on the right. I changed the sheets just last week," Marigold whispered. "Thank you," and carried Tessa inside. Twyla followed her bunny tucked beneath one arm. Juniper appeared without a sound from the hallway. 11 barefoot in thick socks, wearing an oversized sweater and plaid pajama pants. She looked at the new arrivals with eyes wide and curious. Her gaze rested longest on Tessa, then drifted to her mother. "This is Juniper," Boaz said. "She's not shy, just doesn't speak. Hearing's fine, just prefers quiet." Juniper made a small wave. Twyla waved back. That night, Boaz sat by the fireplace as flames crackled and hissed. He had a book in his lap, but he didn't read it. Instead, he listened to the coughs behind the closed door, the soft whispers of a mother comforting her child. It brought back a flood of memories he'd buried under routine and silence. After some time, Marigold returned to the main room. Her face was pale, drawn tight with worry. She's resting. The fever's not as high. Boaz nodded and gestured toward the chair across from him. She sat folding her hands together to keep them from shaking. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't come by, she said softly. We didn't even know where the bus was going. Just away. Boaz nodded. I've seen a lot of away in my time. It's a lonely place. They sat in silence for a moment. Then her eyes moved toward a small shelf above the fireplace. It held an old oil lamp, its glass chimney smudged with time. The wick was untouched. That lamp still work? She asked quietly. He looked up. Hasn't been lit since my wife passed. She used to call it her porch star. Said it would guide me home if I ever got lost. That's beautiful. Boaz shrugged. It's just glass and oil now. She studied his face. There was sorrow there, yes, but also strength. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, only reveals itself in the moments that matter. Would you mind if I lit it? He hesitated. Then, no. Go ahead. She stood, reached for the matches on the mantel. When she struck one, the brief scent of sulfur filled the room. She touched the flame to the wick. The lamp came to life, soft, steady golden. A quiet glow settled over the cabin like a blanket. Boaz looked at it for a long time. I didn't realize how much I missed that light, he said almost to himself. Marigold sat back down. Maybe it was waiting for someone who needed it again. Juniper returned, then carrying a drawing crayon on scrap paper. She handed it to Marigold. A house, a tree, 3 stick figures. Then a 4th one drawn in a different color. A woman with long hair arms wrapped around the others. That's me, Marigold asked gently. Juniper nodded. Marigold blinked, quickly caught off guard by the sudden swell in her throat. That's beautiful. Boaz looked down at the fire again. She doesn't draw people unless she trusts them. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was the beginning of something unspoken, something warm, something whole. Morning came slowly through the frosted windows, washing the cabin in muted tones of gold and silver. The snow outside had not let up during the night, blanketing everything in silence. Inside, however, there was motion, a kind of gentle stirring, like a song just beginning. Boaz rose early as always. Years of waking before the sun to fix what others left broken had left his body trained to stillness and routine. He brewed coffee and stoked the fire before stepping outside to shovel the path, more out of habit than necessity. As he worked, he paused at the edge of the porch, staring at the woods beyond. The lamp Marigold lit the night before still glowed faintly beside the door, the flame steady and alive. It hadn't flickered once. Somehow, that small light made the day seem less cold. Back inside, the quiet was broken by small footsteps. Juniper, still in pajamas, tiptoed into the kitchen, trailed by Twyla and Tessa, one holding a bunny, the other holding a piece of toast that looked too big for her hand. Boaz glanced over his shoulder from the stove. Mornin'. Juniper signed good morning with her hands, and to his surprise, Twyla did the same, clumsily but unmistakable. Boaz blinked. You know sign not really, Twyla said. But Juniper showed me how to say hello and thank you last night. Juniper smiled, a real one, and nodded. Boaz looked toward the hallway. He hadn't seen Juniper smile like that since before Holly died. It wasn't just the smile. It was the brightness in her eyes, the ease in her shoulders. As if, somehow in the space of one snowy evening, these 2 tiny strangers had opened a door no one else could find. You want eggs? He asked. Tessa nodded eagerly, her mouth full of toast. Juniper got out plates without needing to be told. Twyla offered to help set the table, dragging over a wooden step stool to reach the cups. Marigold joined them a few minutes later, her hair pulled back, eyes soft with sleep and worry. Tessa's fever broke, she said. Still tired, but no more coughing fits. Boaz smiled. That's good news. She wouldn't take her medicine unless Juniper signed that it would make her better. That made Boaz pause. She trusts her already. She does. And so do I. It was a simple statement, but Boaz felt the weight of it. Trust was rare, precious, earned, never asked for. And here it was, offered freely like a gift left on a doorstep. After breakfast, the girls began exploring. Juniper took the lead, showing the twins the toy box Boaz had built years ago when he still believed in birthday parties and bedtime stories. Inside were wooden animals building blocks, a xylophone with 3 missing keys, and a harmonica that wheezed more than it sang. Soon, laughter filled the cabin, the kind of laughter that chases cobwebs from rafters and lingers in corners long after it's gone. Twyla found a pair of old earmuffs and declared herself the cabin queen, while Tessa built a crooked fort out of couch cushions. Juniper taught them how to tap rhythms on the wooden floor, how to stack spoons without toppling, how to speak with hands instead of mouths. Boaz watched from the kitchen, pretending to clean, but really just witnessing. Marigold sat nearby, mending a rip in Twyla's coat. I've never seen them this happy, she said softly. They seem at home, Boaz replied. She looked up. I didn't think that was possible again. Not after everything. He nodded, not pressing. Everyone carried a silence. They didn't know how to speak yet. Later that afternoon, Twyla discovered the old upright piano in the corner. Its keys were dusty, its wood faded, but when she pressed one, it rang out with surprising clarity. Boaz turned from the fire. I haven't touched that thing in years. Can I try? Twyla asked. Sure, he said, walking over. She tapped a few notes, then looked at him. Do you know any songs? Boaz smiled, moved the bench aside and sat down. Only one I remember all the way through. He began to play, slow, imperfect, but unmistakably familiar. Amazing Grace. Juniper moved beside him, signing each line. Tessa stood near her mother, listening with wide eyes. When Boaz finished, the girls clapped. Twyla hugged him around the waist, sudden and strong. You play like my daddy used to. He froze. Then slowly he placed a hand on her shoulder. Then he must have been a good man. Marigold said nothing. But in her eyes, something opened, a quiet acknowledgement of grief, shared, and perhaps beginning to mend. That evening after dinner, the girls drew pictures by the fireplace. Boaz went to his room to retrieve something. When he returned, he held a thin, worn book. Juniper used to love this, he said. Thought maybe the girls would too. It was a collection of folk tales, stories of kindness, forgiveness, and small miracles. Marigold took the book in her hands like it was something sacred. Would you read one? She asked. Boaz hesitated. Then yeah. Yeah, I'd like that. As he read, the girls leaned in, heads on shoulders, hands folded in laps. The fire crackled, the lamp glowed, and the cabin, for the first time in years, felt whole. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the light from small hands grew larger than Boaz ever thought possible. The snow let up the next morning, leaving behind a crisp blue sky and a landscape so white it shimmered. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows, catching the lingering warmth in the wooden walls, bouncing off metal pots, flickering across the floorboards like light tiptoeing in joy. Inside, the girls were already busy. Juniper was showing Twyla how to make paper stars from old pages of a seed catalog. Tessa, wrapped in a quilt, sat near the fire, tracing hearts on the frosted window with her finger. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that made you stop and realize just how loud your life had been before. Boaz stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. He glanced toward the back hallway where Marigold had disappeared earlier. She hadn't come out yet. He tapped gently on the door to the room she shared with the girls. "You okay in there?" A pause. Then, "Yes, just give me one more minute." Boaz stepped back and leaned against the doorframe. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but something about her voice had changed. Lower, steadier, like it carried more than just words. When the door opened, Marigold was holding something small in her hands. It was a book, a thin leather-bound journal. The cover worn, the pages inside stiff with time. She clutched it to her chest, like it might fall apart otherwise. "I found it behind the dresser," she said softly. "Didn't mean to snoop. I was looking for an extra blanket." Boaz's breath hitched. "I think it belonged to her. Your wife." He didn't move. She wrote in it. Not a lot. Just thoughts. Moments. Marigold looked up, her eyes shining but steady. "Would you want to read it with me?" He hesitated. Then slowly he nodded. They sat together by the fire as the girls played on the rug nearby. Marigold opened the book gently, careful not to crack the spine. Her fingers lingered on the first page, written in neat cursive to Boaz. "In case you forget how loved you are." He swallowed hard. Marigold turned the page and began to read aloud. "Today Juniper said her first word apple. Boaz wasn't home, and I wish I'd waited, but it slipped out." When he held her later, she didn't say it again, but he didn't mind. He said just holding her was enough. Another page. "Boaz works too hard, fixes everything but his own tired hands. I tried to tell him he doesn't have to do it all, but he says he doesn't know how to stop. I hope one day someone tells him it's okay to rest." Marigold's voice cracked, and she paused. The girls were quiet now, sensing the shift in the air. Even Juniper was still. Boaz leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Keep going," he whispered. She did. "If I don't make it, if this illness takes more than my strength, if it takes me, I hope he finds someone who reminds him what home feels like. Someone who walks through storms with their head up. Someone whose laughter reaches the cracks in his silence." Marigold stopped there. The page was smudged with what looked like water damage, but Boaz knew better. He'd cried into that book once long ago and never opened it again. He looked at her eyes brimming. "I forgot she wrote that." Marigold placed her hand over his. "You didn't forget. You just put it somewhere safe." Boaz stared at the fire for a long moment. She was braver than I ever gave her credit for. "She still is," Marigold said. Her words didn't just sit on that page. They waited. They waited for the right time and the right person to read them again. Outside, the sun cast long golden lines across the snow. Inside, a new warmth stirred quiet, steady healing. Later that evening, as twilight fell, Boaz returned to the fireplace. The oil lamp still sat on the mantel, its glass now polished, the wick still burning from the night before. He picked it up and carried it to the porch. Marigold followed, standing beside him in the fresh snow. The girls were asleep, their giggles from earlier replaced by the even rhythm of dreaming. Boaz lit the lamp again, though it had never gone out. He held it up to the porch beam and hung it by the hook that had long since rusted, but never failed. "What was it she called it?" Marigold asked. Boaz smiled. "Her porch star. She said it would guide me home." They stood there for a long time, watching the light flicker in the windless air. "You think she'd be okay with this?" he asked finally. "With what? With you? With them? With us?" Marigold didn't answer at first. She just slipped her hand into his, her touch neither hesitant nor rushed. "I think she said she's the one who left the light on for us." Boaz didn't speak, but his hand tightened around hers, and the answer filled the silence between them. The cabin awoke slowly, not from alarms or urgency, but from the quiet magic of morning light. The fire had dwindled overnight, glowing gently now, like an embered heart, while the scent of cinnamon oats, courtesy of marigold, floated through the air with quiet invitation. Boaz stirred early, as he always did, but this morning felt different. The air was crisper. Yes, but softer too, like something invisible had settled across the wooden beams during the night, mending things that neither hands nor words had been able to fix. He found Juniper already sitting cross-legged by the hearth, tracing musical notes onto a page with colored pencils. Nearby, Tessa and Twyla were wrapped in a single blanket, their heads together, as they whispered secrets only twins could understand. Every so often, they'd look toward Juniper and smile. Boaz poured himself a cup of coffee and stood in the kitchen doorway, taking it all in. The room wasn't just warmer, it was alive. You ever think he murmured mostly to himself that silence can be louder than sound? Marigold entered just then, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She looked rested in a way he hadn't seen since the day she arrived. "I used to be afraid of silence," she said. "Then I realized it's just space waiting for meaning." Boaz offered her the second mug without speaking. She took it, fingers brushing briefly. It wasn't a spark, it was something better. Recognition. Later that morning, Twyla returned to the old upright piano and began tapping random notes again. Her brow furrowed in thought the way a child's does when they feel something forming just beneath their fingers. Juniper joined her, watching with interest. Then she slipped into the next room and came back with the harmonica, the one Boaz had repaired years ago, but never played again. She offered it to Tessa. The three girls sat side by side, one at the keys, one with breath on brass, and one with paper sheets and rhythm sticks made from wooden spoons. The sound they created wasn't music in the classical sense, but it was pure. It was joy given form. Marigold looked on her hand, at her mouth, eyes glistening. "Do they know what they're doing?" she asked Boaz softly. "They know enough," he replied. He moved to the piano bench, nudging Twyla gently aside. "Mind if I try something?" Twyla scooted over, grinning. Boaz placed his hands on the keys. It had been years his muscles remembered more than his mind did. He started with something simple. "You are my sunshine." Twyla picked up on it immediately. Tessa joined with harmonica flourishes. Sometimes a half beat off, but no one cared. And Juniper clapped the rhythm so gently, her face lit with something that hadn't lived there in a long time. Marigold stood in the doorway, her hands trembling not from cold, but from something she didn't dare name yet. It was the sound of home rebuilding itself from the broken notes of grief. When the song ended, the girls cheered. Twyla threw her arms around Boaz's shoulders. That was so good. He chuckled, a rare, honest sound. "Think I'm a little rusty. You sound like someone who remembers how to be happy," Marigold said quietly. He looked at her. "And you sound like someone who's starting to believe again." Later that afternoon, Boaz and Marigold sat outside on the porch while the girls played near the edge of the tree line. The snow had softened into slush, and the sun melted the icicles into slow, steady drops. Boaz held the harmonica in his hand, turning it over. "I bought this for Juniper when she was 4, he said. She used to play it while Holly cooked. Little concerts every evening. Then one day she stopped. After the funeral, she buried it under her bed. I didn't find it again until I cleaned out the closet last spring." "Why didn't you throw it away?" Marigold asked. "Because he said slowly something in me hoped she'd pick it up again one day, even if I didn't think she would." Marigold nodded. "I packed away all of Arthur's things. I thought it was for the girls' sake, but it was for mine. I couldn't bear to see him. Everywhere." And now Boaz asked. She paused. Now I realize maybe seeing isn't the same as hurting. Maybe it's how we remember without breaking. Boaz looked at her, really looked at the curve of her mouth, the way her eyes didn't avoid the hard truths. The porch light beside them flickered slightly in the breeze, but the flame held steady. "I never thought I'd have music in this house again," he said, "and I never thought I'd hear my daughters laugh without it hurting." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The space between them was no longer empty. It was full of promise of healing, of the quiet song they were beginning to play together. That evening, Juniper gave Boaz another drawing the same porch as before, but this time with 5 people all smiling. A heart hovered above the roof, and in the window, the lantern still burned. Boaz swallowed hard. "You forgot someone," he teased gently. Juniper shook her head and pointed to the 6th figure, small, floating just above the others. A woman with long hair and a soft smile. "Holly." Marigold stepped beside him, reading the unspoken message. Her hand rested on his back, firm and reassuring. "She's still here," Juniper signed. And in that moment, as the fire crackled and the drawing glowed beneath their fingers, Boaz knew she was right. It was a Tuesday when the knock came. Boaz had just finished splitting wood, the back of his flannel shirt damp with effort and snowflakes clinging to his beard. Inside the cabin was alive with warmth and laughter. Juniper was teaching Twyla and Tessa how to string cranberries and popcorn for what they declared was winter tree decorating, even though no one had mentioned Christmas. Marigold stood at the stove, stirring soup with one hand and humming without realizing it, the kind of hum that comes from a body beginning to believe again. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. Not urgent, but not familiar either. Boaz opened the door to find 2 women bundled in scarves and long coats, the kind that looked like they hadn't seen snow in years. The older one wore too much perfume and not enough patience. The younger woman looked uncomfortable, glancing over her shoulder toward the road, like she wished she were somewhere else. Boaz wiped his hands on a towel. "Can I help you?" The older woman smiled, tight-lipped and too polished. "You're Mr. Whitlow, I assume." "I'm Mrs. Garland. My niece Kendra was your daughter's cousin. We heard through town that Juniper's been staying with company." Boaz's spine stiffened, and she stepped closer, her boots crunching over the packed snow. "Well, we were just surprised. You know how people talk. It's a small town." "Word gets around. People should mind their own fences," he said evenly. "Mrs." Garland gave a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We simply wondered if the arrangement was, what's the word, appropriate. After all, a man living alone with a widow and her children." Boaz didn't say anything. Didn't have to. The cold in his eyes said it all. Just then the door creaked behind him. Juniper appeared, standing straight and still. Her face betrayed nothing but her hand, clenched the hem of her sleeve. Mrs. Garland's tone softened. "Sweetheart, don't you miss your mother's side of the family? We could come take you for the weekend. Give you some proper time." Juniper didn't move. Marigold stepped in, standing behind the girl like a wall of quiet strength. "We're doing just fine here," she said. "But you're not family," Mrs. Garland said. Twyla's voice rang out from the next room, clear and indignant. "Yes, we are." Then came footsteps. Tessa appeared, holding her drawing of the porch with 6 figures and a glowing light. "This is our home," she said, lifting the picture. "And that's our porch star. It means we belong." Mrs. Garland blinked, visibly caught off guard. Boaz stepped forward and gently guided the door halfway closed. "You don't get to define what family means here. You want to know what's appropriate. It's feeding people when they're hungry. It's letting kids be kids when the world's tried to make them old too fast. And it's love, quiet, constant, and unasked for. That's what's appropriate." Mrs. Garland's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked at Kendra, who had the decency to look embarrassed. "We'll be going then," she said stiffly. Boaz nodded and shut the door, not hard, but with finality. Silence lingered. Then Juniper turned and walked into the living room, where she picked up a piece of paper and began to draw again. Marigold let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "That was," she began. "Unwelcome," Boaz offered. I was going to say ugly. But yes, that night no one mentioned the visit. But Boaz saw it in the way Juniper drew closer to Marigold without needing words, in how Twyla stood just a little taller when she brought Boaz a bowl of soup, and in how Tessa reached for Juniper's hand during bedtime prayers. Later, after the girls had gone to bed, Boaz sat on the porch with Marigold beside him. The lantern swung gently in the wind, casting halos of amber light on the snow. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "Let them," Marigold replied. He looked at her. "This, whatever this is, it's become something, hasn't it?" She nodded. "It has. And it's real. More real than most things I've called home." He swallowed. "I didn't expect it. Neither did I." They sat in silence for a while. Then she added, "But maybe that's how all the best things come. Quiet. Uninvited. Just in time." Boaz looked at her, his eyes filled with the kind of certainty he hadn't known in years. "I'm glad you knocked." Marigold smiled her hand, brushing his without hurry or hesitation. "You were the one who opened the door." The snow had softened to slush by the time Marigold finally sat down to write. The cabin was quiet, an unusual thing now that it held more than one heartbeat. Tessa and Twyla had gone to bed early after a long day of fort building and storytelling. Juniper, ever gentle, had fallen asleep with her head against the armrest, one hand still wrapped around a sketch of the lantern by the porch. Boaz was out in the woodshed, fixing a broken hinge on the door. She could hear his movements, steady, methodical, the way a man works when his hands understand silence better than words. Marigold stared at the blank page in front of her. The journal had once belonged to Arthur. It still smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar. She hadn't opened it since the week of his funeral. But tonight, something inside her whispered, "Now." So she picked up a pen, drew in a breath, and let it begin. "Dear Arthur, I don't know if this is a prayer or a confession. Maybe it's both. I used to think grief was like drowning. But it's not. It's more like walking through a house where everything still smells like you. Only now, I flinch when I breathe. I kept your shirt hanging on the bedroom door for months. I still hear the way your boots hit the porch steps. And yet I'm writing this from someone else's home. A man's home. His name is Boaz. He has a daughter, Juniper. She doesn't speak, but she listens better than most people here. He fixes things for a living. But what he doesn't know is that he's been fixing something inside me without realizing it. He's kind, Arthur. Not in a loud way. The kind that offers soup when you didn't ask. That notices when your hands are cold and leaves gloves on the bench without saying a word. I don't know what this is. I don't even know what to call it. But for the first time in a long time, I feel something that doesn't ache. And it's terrifying. And it's beautiful. I still miss you. I always will. But somehow, this light that Boaz leaves on every night, it doesn't feel like a betrayal. It feels like you're the one who lit it. I hope that's not wrong. I hope you'd be glad we're not freezing. I hope you'd be glad I'm learning to laugh again. I hope you know this letter isn't a goodbye. It's a thank you. Love, Marigold." She stared at the final line, her hand trembling over the ink. A tear landed on the corner of the page, smudging only slightly, just enough to feel real. The door creaked softly. Boaz stepped in, brushing snow from his sleeves. He looked at her with gentle curiosity. "You okay?" Marigold nodded, closing the journal. "Yeah, just talking to ghosts." Boaz hung his coat. "They listen better than most people." She smiled faintly. "You're not wrong." Juniper stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. Boaz walked over and scooped her into his arms without thinking. It was a motion so natural, so full of love, that Marigold felt something warm rise in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the fire burning low in the hearth. As Boaz tucked his daughter in, Marigold opened the journal once more and tore the page out carefully. She folded it, placed it in an envelope, and walked to the old bookshelf in the corner. There, tucked between a hymnal and an outdated telephone directory, sat a weathered wooden box. She opened it. Inside were a few keepsakes, a photo of Boaz with Holly, a hospital bracelet from Juniper's birth, a dried sprig of lavender. Marigold hesitated, then placed the letter inside. When Boaz returned, she didn't say what she'd done. She didn't have to. Instead, they sat by the fire. She leaned against the armrest, and this time, when her shoulder brushed his, she didn't pull away. Outside, the wind had calmed. Inside, something had changed, not loudly, not all at once, but undeniably, like a letter sent out into the night, and finally finding a place to rest. The weather warmed just enough for the icicles to fall. They crashed from the eaves in slow, shimmering cascades, shattering like delicate glass on the front porch. Tessa and Twyla squealed with each crash, running from window to point and giggle, their faces lit with the innocent wonder that had once been buried beneath grief. Inside, Marigold stood at the sink, rinsing berries in cold water, while Juniper quietly arranged her latest drawing on the table, a heart surrounded by musical notes, snowflakes, and what looked like 6 hands holding a lantern together. Boaz entered from the mudroom boots, tracking snowmelt. He carried in a small wooden box, something he'd salvaged from the shed, cleaned and polished. He placed it beside the fireplace without explanation, just a quiet nod when Juniper looked at it. Marigold met his gaze. "You planning something?" "Maybe. Or maybe I just figured this place could use a little more history on display." Juniper opened the box later that afternoon. Inside were mementos Boaz had kept locked away, a dog-eared photo of Holly playing guitar on the porch, Juniper's first handprint in plaster, a faded concert ticket from a band Boaz barely remembered, but Holly had loved. No one said much, but something shifted in the air like silence, but warmer. That evening after supper, Boaz stepped out to check the chimney flue. The wind had picked up again, rattling the bare trees, sending eddies of snow curling across the yard. He didn't see the car at first, just the twin headlights slicing through the dusk. The vehicle pulled into the driveway slowly, a rusted Oldsmobile, its tires crunching over snow and gravel. Boaz stiffened. He wasn't expecting anyone. He stepped off the porch just as the engine cut. The door opened, and Harlan Vance stepped out. Behind him came Noreen, bundled in a thick coat, her hands trembling slightly. She clutched a paper bag. Boaz said nothing, only held the door open. Inside, the girls froze. Tessa clutched Twyla's arm. Marigold turned from the sink, a dish still in hand. Juniper looked to Boaz first, and only when he nodded did she relax. Harlan removed his hat slowly. We didn't mean to drop in. Didn't call. Didn't even know if we'd make it down the road." Noreen stepped forward, her voice thin but steady. "We brought some preserves. From the cellar. Just in case the girls still like black cherry." Marigold didn't move at first. Then she took a breath, dried her hands, and crossed the room. She didn't smile, but she didn't close off either. "You're welcome to sit," she said. They did. For several minutes, conversation limped along, weather-old recipes, the school calendar, until finally Harlan exhaled deeply, like a man whose pride had kept him underwater for too long. "I was wrong," he said. "We were both wrong." Noreen reached for her husband's hand. "We were scared. Not just of losing Arthur, of losing them, of being reminded every day that we couldn't give them more. Marigold's voice was quiet. We didn't want more. We wanted enough. And we would have shared that with you if you'd let us. Harlan nodded. We're ready now to be part of their lives again. If you'll have us. Twyla looked to Marigold. Tessa climbed down from her chair and walked slowly toward her grandparents. She didn't say a word, just handed Noreen the drawing Juniper had made earlier, the one with 6 hands holding a lantern. Noreen's eyes filled with tears. Boaz watched it all unfold, quiet, steady. Later that night, after Harlan and Noreen had left, Marigold stood with Boaz on the porch, watching their taillights disappear into the trees. I didn't think they'd come, she said. They didn't know how Boaz replied. Sometimes healing doesn't come when you want it. Sometimes it comes when you're finally able to hold it. She turned toward him. The porch light cast a halo around her hair. You think this is healing? He met her eyes. I think this is the beginning of it. She nodded. Then, almost without thinking, she reached for his hand, not out of need, but out of something stronger choice. Boaz didn't speak. He just held on. And somewhere inside the cabin, Juniper added 2 more hands to the lantern drawing. The road wound like a ribbon through the frost-bitten woods, lined with the quiet hush of winter trees, still bare from the last storm. In the back seat of Boaz's truck, Twyla and Tessa pressed their noses against the windows, watching the familiar houses and fields pass by, places that once held fear and memory, now softened by distance. Marigold sat in the passenger seat, her hands resting in her lap, holding the same scarf Noreen had wrapped around her shoulders weeks ago at the bus station. She hadn't worn it since until now. Boaz gripped the wheel with quiet confidence. He didn't speak much, but his presence filled the cab like the steady hum of the engine, calm, unshakable. You sure you want to do this? He asked once, not turning his eyes from the road. Marigold nodded. They came to us. Now it's our turn. Behind them, Juniper held a box on her lap, inside. Carefully wrapped in tissue paper were drawings from each of the girls, portraits, messages, and a small card written in blocky letters. Thank you for letting us go so we could grow. They arrived just past noon. The old house looked smaller than Marigold remembered, though nothing had changed. The shutters still sagged, the porch light still hung crooked, and the wind still bent the same birch trees near the fence. Twyla reached for her mother's hand. Do you think they'll cry again? Marigold smiled gently. Maybe. But sometimes tears are the best kind of welcome. Boaz parked, stepped out, and opened the truck doors without ceremony. He offered no advice, no warning, just a simple nod. Marigold approached the porch with the girls beside her, Juniper trailing behind. Boaz stayed near the truck, giving them space. This moment wasn't his to take. The door opened before they knocked. Noreen stood in the frame apron dusted with flour, a pie tin cooling on the table behind her. Harlan appeared beside her, as if summoned by some quiet force. They stared. Not in disbelief, not in judgment, just stunned. Marigold stepped forward. She held out the scarf. I kept it, she said softly. Noreen took a slow step down from the porch. Her hands trembled not from age or cold, but emotion. I hoped you would. Twyla and Tessa ran to her, arms outstretched. Harlan crouched to catch them both, his face breaking open into a sob he didn't try to hide. Juniper stepped forward, next, placing the box gently at Noreen's feet, then retreating quietly. No words were exchanged for a long moment. There didn't need to be. Some things were too sacred for language. Eventually, Noreen straightened and opened her arms toward Marigold. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I know, Marigold replied. They held each other like mothers, like daughters, like women who had lost and still dared to love again. From the truck, Boaz watched the moment unfold. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. He simply exhaled slowly, as if something tight in his chest had finally uncoiled. A few hours later, after pie and laughter, and a long overdue game of cards between Harlan and Twyla, Boaz stood on the porch, readying the truck to head back. Marigold stepped beside him. "You sure you don't want to come in? I think this part is yours," he said. Besides, Juniper's drawing with Noreen and Tessa just roped Harlan into another round of Go Fish. Looks like they're doing fine without me. Marigold looked up at him, her eyes warm. "Thank you for bringing us." He nodded, then after a pause touched her shoulder gently. "For the record, I don't think you ever really left home. You just had to take the long way back." She leaned in, then brushing her lips to his cheek. "And I wouldn't have found it without you." The drive back was quiet, just him and the hush of snow under Tyre. But something about it felt different this time. Not empty, just full of everything he hadn't known he needed. Back at the cabin, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Boaz stepped inside and noticed something taped to the fridge. A child's drawing. 6 hands around a lantern. But now, in the center, someone had drawn a house, its chimney puffing heart-shaped smoke into the sky. Underneath, in Juniper's careful handwriting, "Sometimes you leave home to find it." Boaz smiled, and for the first time in years, he whispered into the quiet, "Amen." Spring didn't arrive all at once in Vermont. It trickled in like a shy guest, melting snow in quiet patches, loosening the creek beds, warming the earth just enough for crocuses to peek through, and robins to test their songs. The cabin, once a refuge from winter, had become something more, a home with a heartbeat. A place where every laugh, every note of music, every whisper of wood crackling in the fireplace added to the story stitched quietly into its walls. It was on one of those warmer afternoons that Juniper asked if she could paint the porch wall. Boaz looked up from the woodpile, brow raised. "What kind of paint?" "The good kind," Marigold said behind him, holding up a small box of acrylics they'd found in a forgotten closet. "We tested them. They're still good. And I think it's time this place had a mural." Boaz hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Just don't paint over the lantern." Juniper smiled and signed. "We'll paint around it, like it's the center of everything." Over the next few days, the girls transformed the rough wooden siding into something magical. Twyla painted birds, bright blue cardinal red, flying across a sky so vivid it made the porch seem taller. Tessa painted flowers, each one unique, her small hands dotted with purple and green by the end of each afternoon. Juniper painted people. Small, careful figures, 6 of them all holding hands. And in the very center, she painted the lantern, not just as it was, but glowing, radiating light in long golden beams that stretched beyond the frame of the wall itself. Marigold painted too, a tree with deep roots beneath the mural, an anchor to ground it all. Boaz didn't paint, but he stood nearby each day, handing brushes, mixing colors, fixing a wobbly step, quietly watching. On the final day, as the mural dried in the soft sun, Juniper brought Boaz a small frame. Inside was her latest drawing, the same scene, but this time with music notes floating above the heads of the 6 figures. Below it, in block letters, she'd written, "Home isn't a place. It's the people who carry your light when you can't." Boaz held the frame in his hands for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edges. Then he turned and nailed it right next to the porch door, below the real lantern. That night, Marigold stepped out to find him sitting on the porch, guitar in hand. "You never told me you still played," she said, settling beside him. I don't. Not often. But tonight felt like it needed a little music. She nodded, folding her hands over her lap. He strummed a few chords. His voice, when it came, was soft, a little rough around the edges, but steady. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. She joined him for the last line, their voices twining in the golden quiet. When the song ended, Boaz set the guitar aside. The porch light glowed behind them. The mural shimmered slightly in the evening air. You ever think, he said, that maybe Holly knew Marigold looked at him? Knew what? That one day, there'd be music here again. Laughter. Paint on the porch. She didn't hope small Marigold said, smiling. And neither should you. Boaz nodded, then turned toward her. I used to think my life ended when she died, like the world kept turning, but I wasn't on it anymore. Marigold reached for his hand, and now he looked at her eyes clear. Now I think maybe she just passed me the lantern, and I've been walking toward the porch ever since. Summer tiptoed in quietly, like it knew this family had already learned to love softly. The porch was now a living journal. Neighbors who passed by often slowed their steps to admire the mural 6 figures joined in color and light beneath a tree whose roots sank into paint, into wood, into memory. No one asked who painted it. They knew. They felt it. Inside the cabin, life settled into a rhythm, not unlike music, imperfect, warm, full of surprise notes that somehow still harmonized. Boaz made pancakes every Sunday morning. Tessa always licked the spoon. Twyla insisted on setting the table with pine cones as napkin weights, because it's more Vermonty, she said. Juniper, now sleeping with the door cracked open, began painting on canvas instead of paper. And Marigold took up humming again, this time with purpose. On the day the adoption papers arrived for Boaz to become legal guardian of the twins, he found them sitting unopened on the kitchen table, not from fear, just from the weight of what it meant. You know you don't have to do this, Marigold said quietly, standing beside him. They already love you. You're already theirs. Boaz turned to her. I know, but it's not about the papers. It's about giving them what no one ever gave me, a name that means they'll never be let go. She reached for his hand and placed a pen between his fingers. Then sign it, and let them watch you become the man they already believe you are. That evening, with the sun painting the mountains pink and amber, Boaz sat at the kitchen table with all 3 girls watching. Tessa leaned her chin on his shoulder. Twyla bounced in place. Juniper, calm and composed, held her sketch pad close to her chest like it was sacred. With one steady stroke, Boaz signed his name. The girls burst into cheers. Juniper opened her sketch pad and held up the newest drawing, a cabin with a wide porch, a lantern glowing beside the door, and above the roof, written in delicate block letters, was a single word. Forever. Days passed, like petals, falling slow, beautiful unnoticed, until they filled your hands. One evening while the girls were asleep, Boaz stepped out onto the porch to find Marigold waiting. She wore a summer dress, one she hadn't dared wear in years. I wasn't sure it still fit, she said with a smile. Boaz grinned. It fits just right. He stepped closer. The lantern's golden glow danced between them. I never asked, he said. But I need to. Marigold's brows lifted. Would you stay? He asked. Not just for the girls, not just for Juniper. For me. For us. She didn't speak. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his heart. I was never planning to leave, she whispered. You gave us shelter, and then you gave us something better. You gave us a future. Boaz pulled her into his arms, and they swayed there beneath the lantern as if dancing to a melody only they could hear. The stars blinked on one by one. Fireflies rose from the grass in slow spirals, and for the first time in his life, Boaz understood what home truly meant. Not a structure, not a memory, but a light you leave on for someone who hasn't yet found their way. Inside the cabin, Juniper stirred, pulled a blanket over her sisters, and looked once at the mural out the window, just long enough to know the lantern was still there. Still glowing. Still waiting for the next miracle to arrive. And outside, the light stayed on. And maybe maybe, that's what home really is. Not a roof, not even a name, but the light we leave on for someone who didn't know they were looking for it. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Share your city, your state, or just say hello in the comments below. We read every word, and it means the world to us. If stories like this remind you that goodness still exists, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you truly for spending your time here. Until next time, stay warm, stay kind, and keep the light on.